Preschoolers in the 1970s and 1980s were subjected to an execrable television program called Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. It was the kind of PBS kiddie fare that made those of us who were in primary school during those years laugh with derision. Even the most doting of mommies at the time felt a little uncomfortable and had to admit that Fred Rogers was, well, a bit creepy. Never had there been a grown man speaking in the ultra-feminine tones and cadences of the Good Witch and the Wizard of Oz. That is, until the arrival of one Fred Rogers. Gray at the temples, wearing his signature cardigan sweater. Incidentally, an outfit and countenance copied by our most ineffectual president, Jimmy Carter. Now, what does this have to do with the NSA and its media apologists? Well, to put it succinctly, everything.
Please won't you be my neighbor?
As we watch the Edward Snowden NSA scandal unfold on 24-hour cable news channels like Fox, it became clear that the infantile anti-Snowden pro-military national security complex propaganda was aiming for the same part of the brain that Mr. Rogers had tapped into so many decades ago. A whole generation of Mr. Rogers' children is now middle-aged and sitting like vegetables in front of the Fox News channel. Maybe it could be described as Mr. Murdoch's neighborhood. Is it possible that the primitive brain pathways opened by Fred Rogers and his preschool brainwashing project were still there, just waiting for a certain tone of voice? A key like the Queen of Diamonds and the Manchurian Candidate? The tone of Fox News hosts is remarkably similar to that of Fred Rogers. Cable news is the adult equivalent of Mr. Rogers' town called make-believe, with a new Mr. Rogers as the go-to guy on national security. Fox News is Michigan Congressman Mike Rogers' land of make-believe, or maybe more aptly named make-war. The politicians and bureaucrats recruited by Fox News to run interference for the NSA have also learned to speak to the infantilized cable news audience in the same Fred Rogers style. When watching Fox News, the updated Mr. Rogers' favorite venue, he speaks to the audience in the schoolmarm tones of his namesake. Okay, children, listen to your abusive, kleptocratic parent, the government, and stay away from freedom or danger. If your mommy government doesn't watch and listen to you every second, the bad men will get you. Mr. Rogers, King Peter King, and Queen Feinstein are supposed to be from opposite sides of the political spectrum. But when it comes to the NSA's unconstitutional spying, they are locked in a love embrace right out of Wuthering Heights. Why should these supposedly diametrically opposed figures be so hostile to the most basic of human rights, privacy? As George Orwell's 1984 suggested, and the Soviet Union and Red China demonstrated, you can eliminate private property rights and you can institute a total surveillance state, effectively destroying the concept of privacy. Alex Jones was prescient when he called one of his websites prisonplanet.com. By destroying privacy, a despot turns the entire society into an open-air prison. The NSA, TSA, and Homeland Security effectively turned Mr. Rogers' neighborhood into a maximum security correctional facility, or should we say, pre-correctional facility. Exaggeration? Not a bit. In prison, there is no privacy. All telephone calls and mail are screened. Everything from showers to the very private act of relieving oneself are done under the watchful, electronic eyes of the ultimate voyeurs. The New World Order perverts and exhibitionists would have you believe that privacy is somehow based in Freudian guilt or shame, hang-ups, when it is really based on mammalian instinct and God-given self-awareness and something we once called dignity. If there was no advantage to having privacy, the Rockefellers and Rothschilds would live in crowded glass communes instead of vast, isolated estates with armed guards. They literally live in castles and are even reviving the moat as a feature of their landscaping. The miracle of American life was the idea that every man was a sovereign. That meant that you could live in your own castle. The castle represented safety and, most importantly, privacy. Mr. Mike Rogers, King Peter King, and Queen Feinstein are supposed to represent the people, to keep the all-seeing eye of the NSA and executive branch from abusing the citizens of make-believe. Instead, they generate fear and paranoia in an effort to convince the people that a boogeyman from the Middle East or a homegrown white-bread terrorist will blow them to bits. As Alex Jones has pointed out, the only thing that we really have to fear is democide itself. Democide is death by government. Regimes of all kinds, monarchies, fascists, communists, and everything in between, have been the most efficient and prolific killers of human beings. The more efficient the surveillance, the more efficient the killing. Mr. Mike Rogers' neighborhood is very much like Mr. Rogers' neighborhood after all. Mr. Rogers set up his neighborhood on a tabletop. He is literally a giant looking down on the denizens of make-believe with his TV camera and microphones recording all the goings-on. Come to think of it, nothing is private in Mr. Rogers' neighborhood, just as nothing is private in Mr. Mike Rogers' neighborhood. The all-seeing eye hovers above us all.
Please won't you be my neighbor?